Finally, 3 more days, and everything will finally be mine. Those were the words that stopped me in the hallway of my own home. I had heard my wife whisper many things during our 42 years together, but I never expected to hear a sentence that would make me question everything I believed about our marriage. My name is Richard Anderson, and for most of my life, I thought I understood what it meant to build a family. I believed trust was something two people earned slowly over time. I believed that after decades of sharing birthdays, holidays, struggles, and quiet mornings together, there were some things a husband and wife simply never had to question. But that night, standing outside the living room with a glass of water in my hand, I felt like a stranger listening to a conversation that was never meant for me. My wife, Patricia, was sitting on the phone speaking softly. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. "Just wait 3 more days," she said. "After that, everything will be mine." I stood there completely still, not because I was angry, not because I wanted to confront her immediately. I was simply trying to understand what I had just heard. Everything will be mine. What did that mean? After more than 4 decades together, what could Patricia possibly be waiting for? I returned to the kitchen without making a sound. I sat at the table where we had eaten thousands of meals together and looked around the room that had been part of our life for so many years. The photographs on the walls showed a different story. There was our wedding picture from when we were younger. There were pictures of family vacations, holidays, and moments that reminded me of the life we had built together. To anyone looking from the outside, we looked like a couple who had made it through everything. We had lived through difficult years when money was tight. We had celebrated when things improved. We had supported each other through changes that came with getting older. Patricia had been beside me through most of my adult life. That was why her words felt impossible to understand. The next morning, I watched her move through the house like nothing had happened. She poured her coffee, read the newspaper, and asked me what I wanted for dinner. Everything looked normal. That almost made it harder. I wondered if I had misunderstood. Maybe she was talking about something completely different. Maybe there was an explanation that would make those words disappear. I wanted there to be one. After 42 years of marriage, the last thing I wanted to believe was that my wife had been hiding something from me. But once doubt enters your mind, it becomes difficult to ignore. Over the next few days, I started noticing small things I had never paid attention to before. Patricia was more protective of her phone. She stepped into another room when certain calls came in. She seemed distracted whenever I mentioned our future plans. None of those things alone meant anything. People change. People have private thoughts. Everyone deserves some personal space. But together, they created a feeling I could not explain. A feeling that something important was happening without me. I did not tell anyone what I heard. Not my friends. Not my family. Not even Patricia. I needed time to understand before I made a decision that could change everything. The strange part was that I was not afraid of losing money or possessions. After a lifetime of work, I knew material things could be replaced. What frightened me was the possibility that I had spent 42 years loving someone who had quietly created a life that no longer included me. 3 days. That was the timeline she had mentioned. 3 days until something would happen. I did not know what it was. I did not know what she was planning. But I knew one thing. Before those 3 days passed, I needed to discover the truth about the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. For 42 years, Patricia and I built a life that looked ordinary from the outside. But to me, those ordinary moments were the ones that mattered most. I kept thinking about that as I moved through the days after hearing her whisper those words. I kept asking myself the same question. How could the woman who shared almost my entire adult life be keeping something from me? Before doubt entered my mind, I had never questioned Patricia's loyalty. She was the person who stood beside me when we were young and trying to build a future together. We did not begin with much. Our first home was a small house with old floors and a kitchen that needed more repairs than we could afford at the time. But we made it ours. We painted the walls together. We planted flowers in the backyard. We celebrated every small improvement because we knew what it meant to work for something. I still remembered those early years when we would sit at the kitchen table after dinner and talk about the future. Patricia would tell me about the things she wanted to accomplish, and I would tell her about the dreams I had for our family. We were not perfect. No marriages. We had disagreements. We had difficult seasons. But I believed we always found our way back to each other. That belief was what made her secret so difficult to understand. I was not just questioning a conversation. I was questioning the foundation of my entire life. As I watched Patricia during those 3 days, I started remembering moments from the past that I had ignored. Looking back, there were small signs that something had changed. About 6 months earlier, she had become more interested in financial documents than she used to be. She started organizing papers more often. She asked questions about accounts and property records that seemed unusual. At the time, I thought she was simply preparing for the future. We were getting older, and planning ahead was responsible. I never imagined there could be another reason. One afternoon, while Patricia was out running errands, I walked into our home office. I had spent years keeping important documents there. Tax records, insurance information, and paperwork related to our home. Everything had always been organized because Patricia liked things arranged carefully. As I looked through the folders, I noticed one section that seemed different. There were papers I did not recognize. I did not open them immediately. I stood there for several minutes, reminding myself that suspicion could damage something that might still have an explanation. Trust was not something I wanted to throw away because of one sentence I overheard. I closed the folder and stepped away. That evening, Patricia and I ate dinner together like we had countless times before. She talked about a neighbor's garden and a recipe she wanted to try. I listened, but part of me was somewhere else. I kept wondering whether the person sitting across from me knew that I had heard her. I wondered whether she felt guilty or whether she believed everything would happen without me noticing. After dinner, we sat on the porch. The same porch where we had spent many summer evenings watching the sunset. Patricia reached for my hand, and for a moment, I almost forgot everything. That was the hardest part. The memories were real. The love we shared was real. The laughter, the struggles, and the years together were not imaginary. But sometimes the most painful discoveries are not about realizing someone was always wrong. They are about realizing someone you loved may have changed while you were still holding on to the person they used to be. The next morning was the third day, the day Patricia had mentioned. I woke up earlier than usual and watched the sunrise from the kitchen window. I did not know what I would find. I did not know whether my fears were justified or whether I had misunderstood everything. But I knew I could not continue pretending I had not heard what she said. Before the day ended, I would finally learn what Patricia had been waiting for, and I would discover whether the life we built together was still something we both believed in. The morning of the third day arrived quietly, almost too quietly for a day that had been weighing on my mind. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, watching the sunlight slowly move across the floor. This was the same place where Patricia and I had planned our future decades earlier. The same place where we had discussed buying our first home, saving for retirement, and growing old together. But that morning, I was no longer thinking about the future we had planned. I was trying to understand the future Patricia had been planning without me. I heard her footsteps coming down the hallway, and for a moment, I felt the old comfort of routine. She walked into the kitchen wearing the same expression she had worn every morning for years. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and asked if I slept well. I looked at her and wondered how someone could carry a secret while acting completely normal. "Are you doing anything important today?" I asked casually. Patricia paused for just a second. It was brief, but I noticed. "Not really," she answered. "Just a few errands." A few errands. Those words stayed in my mind because I knew there was something she was waiting for. I decided not to confront her yet. I needed answers, not assumptions. I waited until she left the house. Then I walked into our home office again. This time, I opened the folder I had noticed before. Inside were documents related to our property and financial accounts. At first, everything looked familiar. But then I saw a name I did not recognize. There was a financial advisor I had never spoken with. There were notes about transferring certain assets and discussions about future arrangements. I sat down slowly in my chair. My first feeling was not anger. It was confusion. After 42 years together, why would Patricia be making decisions about our future without having a conversation with me? I continued reading carefully. I discovered that Patricia had been asking questions about what would happen to our assets if certain changes were made. She had been gathering information quietly for months. The documents did not tell the whole story, but they confirmed one thing. My wife had been preparing for something, and she had chosen not to include me. I placed the papers back exactly where I found them. I did not want to act out of emotion. I had spent my entire life believing that difficult situations deserved thoughtful decisions. That afternoon, I drove to a small coffee shop near town. I sat by the window and watched people walk by, couples talking, families spending time together. Ordinary moments that reminded me how much trust mattered in relationships. I thought about Patricia. I thought about the young woman I married. I thought about the years we shared and the challenges we overcame. I asked myself a difficult question. Was this the same woman who had stood beside me for decades, or had I simply refused to see the changes happening in front of me? When I returned home, Patricia was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a small stack of papers in front of her. She looked surprised when she saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said, "Richard, there is something I need to tell you." My heart sank because I realized she was finally going to say something. I sat across from her and waited. I wanted to hear her words directly, not through a hidden conversation, not through documents. From her. "I have been trying to arrange something for our future," she said. I listened carefully, but I did not know how to tell you. That sentence caught my attention, because for the first time, I wondered if the secret I discovered was not only about what she wanted. Maybe it was also about what she was afraid to say. I looked at my wife, the person I had shared almost my entire life with, and I realized the truth was finally coming closer. Whatever happened next would change the way I saw our marriage forever. I looked at Patricia sitting across from me at the kitchen table, and for the first time in many years, I felt like there was a distance between us that I could not explain. She was still the same person I had shared my life with. The same woman who knew how I liked my coffee in the morning. The same woman who remembered every important date in our family. But that afternoon, I realized there were parts of her thoughts that I had never been invited into. "I have been trying to arrange something for our future," Patricia said again. Her voice was calm, but I could hear uncertainty behind her words. "I should have talked to you sooner." I waited because I wanted to understand, not because I wanted to accuse her. After 42 years of marriage, I owed our relationship that much. "What exactly have you been arranging?" I asked. Patricia looked down at the papers in front of her. For a few moments, she did not answer. Then she explained that she had been reviewing our financial situation and making plans for the years ahead. She said she had been worried about what would happen. As we got older, she wanted to make sure she had security and control over certain decisions. Part of me understood that. Aging changes the way people think about the future. Retirement, health, and financial stability are not easy conversations. But another part of me struggled with the fact that she had made these plans quietly, without me. "Patricia, we have always faced things together," I said. "Why did you feel like you had to do this alone?" She looked at me with a sadness I had not expected. "Because I was afraid you would not agree." That answer stayed with me, not because it explained everything, but because it revealed something deeper. Somewhere along the way, Patricia had stopped believing we could have difficult conversations. Somewhere along the way, fear had replaced trust. I asked her about the papers I found. She admitted she had been speaking with a financial advisor. She had been exploring options related to our property and savings. She told me she was not trying to take anything away from me. She was trying to prepare for what she thought was an uncertain future. But there was still one question I could not ignore. "Then why did you say everything would finally be yours?" I asked. The room became quiet. Patricia looked surprised. For the first time, I saw that she did not realize I had heard those words. "You heard that?" she asked softly. I nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. "Richard, I was talking about something different than what you think." I wanted to believe her. More than anything, I wanted to believe there was an explanation that would make this pain disappear. "Then tell me what you meant," I said. Patricia reached for the papers and turned one of them toward me. She explained that she had been preparing a change in how certain assets would be handled. She had recently received information about a family matter that involved property and future arrangements. She believed that if she handled everything correctly, she would finally have control over something she had worried about for years. But as she spoke, I noticed something important. She was not defending herself like someone trying to hide a secret. She was explaining herself like someone who had made a decision without realizing how deeply it would affect the person beside her. That did not erase the hurt. It did not change the fact that she had kept me outside of an important part of our life. But it made me realize that the situation might be more complicated than I first believed. Later that evening, I went for a walk around our neighborhood. I passed houses where families were sitting outside, enjoying the last light of the day. I thought about all the years Patricia and I had spent together. I thought about the promises we made when we were young. Growing old together was never supposed to mean we would stop communicating. When I returned home, Patricia was waiting in the living room. She looked at me and said, "I should have trusted you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning." Those words mattered, Because the problem was not only what she had planned. The problem was that she had forgotten we were supposed to be partners. And as I sat beside her that night, I realized the next step was not about discovering what she wanted to keep from me. It was about understanding why she felt she had to keep it hidden in the first place. After that conversation with Patricia, I thought the hardest part would be finding out the truth. I was wrong. The hardest part was accepting that the truth was not as simple as I wanted it to be. For several days, I had prepared myself to discover some terrible secret. I had imagined that I would find proof that my wife had completely changed and that the life we built together was not what I believed. But what I found was something much more complicated. Patricia had not stopped caring about me. She had not forgotten the years we shared. Instead, she had allowed fear to create a distance between us, and that distance had become a place where secrets could grow. I spent the next morning sitting in my home office, looking through old photographs and documents from our life together. I found pictures from our first apartment, our early vacations, and family gatherings that seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. There was one photograph that caught my attention. It was taken shortly after we bought our first house. Patricia and I were standing in front of the doorway, smiling like two people who believed they could overcome anything as long as they were together. I stared at that picture for a long time because I realized something important. The problem was not that Patricia had made plans. The problem was that she had stopped sharing those plans with me. We had spent decades building a partnership, but somewhere along the way, we had both become too comfortable assuming we understood each other. That afternoon, Patricia asked if we could sit down and talk again. This time, I noticed something different about her. She was not trying to convince me that everything was fine. She was willing to admit that something between us had changed. "Richard, I need you to know that I never wanted you to feel like you were not part of my life," she said. I listened quietly. "Then why did I feel like a stranger when I found those papers?" I asked. Patricia looked down at her hands. "Because I was afraid." I had heard many explanations over the years from different people, but that answer felt different. Fear was not an excuse, but it was a reason. Patricia explained that as we got older, she started worrying about things she never worried about when we were younger. She worried about losing independence. She worried about making sure everything was organized. She worried about becoming someone who had no control over her own future. She admitted that instead of talking to me, she tried to handle everything herself. She thought she was protecting herself, but she did not realize she was creating a wall between us. I understood more than I wanted to admit. Growing older changes people. It brings new concerns and new uncertainties. But marriage is supposed to be the place where those fears can be shared, not hidden. "Do you still trust me?" Patricia asked. That question was harder than I expected. After 42 years together, I wanted to say yes immediately. But honesty mattered more than comfort. I said. But trust is not something we can assume. It is something we have to rebuild. Patricia nodded. She did not argue. She did not become defensive. She simply accepted what I said. That moment meant more to me than any explanation she could have given. Over the next few weeks, we started having conversations we should have had years earlier. We talked about money. We talked about fears. We talked about what we wanted our future to look like. For the first time in a long time, we were not just living beside each other. We were actually talking again. But there was still one question I could not ignore. I still wanted to understand the meaning behind those words I overheard. I still wanted to know why she said that everything would finally be hers. Patricia had explained part of the story, but I felt there was something she had not told me yet. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, I decided to ask one more time. "Patricia, I believe you are telling me the truth. But I need to understand one thing. What exactly were you waiting for those 3 days to happen?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she quietly said, "Richard, there is something I have not told you yet." And in that moment, I knew the real story was only beginning to come out. Patricia looked at me from across the living room, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had known for more than 4 decades. Not the woman who had kept documents hidden. Not the woman who had whispered words I was never supposed to hear. I saw the person who had stood beside me through some of the most important years of my life. But I also knew that love did not mean ignoring the truth. After 42 years together, we had reached a moment where honesty mattered more than comfort. "Richard, I need to tell you what those 3 days were really about," Patricia said quietly. I sat back and listened. She explained that several months earlier, she had received unexpected information about a piece of property connected to her family. Years before we met, Her parents had owned a small parcel of land that had remained in the family records for decades. She had recently learned that there was a possibility of transferring ownership and finalizing the paperwork. That was the event she had been waiting for. Those 3 days were not about taking something from me. They were about completing a process she believed would give her something she had always wanted to handle herself. But as she continued explaining, I realized there was another layer to the story. The property itself was not the reason she kept everything hidden. The reason was personal. Patricia had always been the practical one in our marriage. She was the person who organized bills, planned schedules, and thought about what could go wrong. When we were younger, that quality helped us build a stable life. But as we grew older, that same habit became something different. She started believing that if she handled problems alone, she was protecting both of us. She convinced herself that she was saving me from unnecessary stress. But what she did not realize was that keeping me outside of those decisions created a different kind of pain. I thought I was taking care of things, she said. I did not realize I was making you feel like you were no longer my partner. Those words were difficult to hear because they were true. For the first time, I understood that betrayal was not always about someone trying to hurt you. Sometimes it came from someone making decisions without realizing the damage their silence could create. I asked Patricia why she used the words, "Everything will finally be mine." She looked embarrassed. Because I was talking about something I never felt I had control over, she explained. I spent so many years building a life with you, but there were parts of my past that I never completely handled. I wanted to prove to myself that I could finish something on my own. I thought about that for a long time. Marriage is often described as two people becoming one, but the truth is that both people still carry their own fears, memories, and unfinished stories. Patricia had carried hers quietly for years. The problem was that she carried it alone. The following day, we drove together to meet with the financial advisor she had been working with. I wanted to understand everything clearly, not because I wanted control, but because I wanted transparency. The advisor explained the situation carefully and confirmed what Patricia had told me. There was no hidden plan against me. There was no attempt to remove me from our life together. There was simply a woman who had become afraid of uncertainty and made the mistake of believing she had to handle everything by herself. On the drive home, Patricia reached over and held my hand. "I am sorry you had to find out that way," she said. I looked out the window at the familiar roads we had traveled for years. "I am sorry too," I replied, "because I should have noticed you were carrying something alone." That conversation did not erase the hurt immediately. Trust does not return in one afternoon. But something important happened that day. We stopped being two people protecting ourselves and started becoming partners again. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was sitting beside my wife, not someone I was trying to understand. Still, one question remained in my mind. Why had Patricia waited so long to tell me the truth? The answer would come from a place I never expected, and it would make me look back at our entire marriage in a different way. After everything Patricia revealed, I thought the hardest part would be understanding the truth behind those 3 days. But I soon realized the real challenge was something much deeper. It was not about paperwork, property, or financial decisions. It was about understanding how two people who had spent 42 years together could slowly stop sharing the things that mattered most. The truth was that Patricia and I had not suddenly become strangers. We had become two people who were quietly carrying our own worries and assuming the other person would understand without being told. Looking back, I could see moments when I should have asked more questions. I could see moments when Patricia tried to talk about her fears, but I was so focused on believing everything was fine that I missed the signs. Sometimes we think strong relationships never struggle. The reality is that strong relationships are built by facing struggles honestly. A few days after our conversation with the financial advisor, Patricia and I decided to take a drive to the place where our story had started. It was a small town about an hour away where we had lived when we were first married. We drove past the old neighborhood, and I felt like I was watching pieces of our past come back to life. There was the small grocery store where we used to shop every weekend. There was the park where we spent summer evenings. There was the road we traveled when we moved into our first home together. Patricia looked out the window and smiled. "Do you remember how scared we were back then?" she asked. I laughed softly. "We had no idea what we were doing. But we figured it out," she said. That sentence stayed with me. We had figured things out because we worked together. We communicated. We trusted each other. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that was what made us strong. We stopped asking questions because we assumed we already knew the answers. We stopped sharing fears because we did not want to worry each other. But silence does not always protect a relationship. Sometimes silence creates distance. That evening, Patricia and I sat on the porch like we had done thousands of times before. The difference was that this time, we were not just sitting together. We were talking. She told me things she had never admitted before. She told me she had been afraid of becoming dependent as we got older. She worried about losing her identity and becoming someone who only existed as part of a couple. I listened carefully because I realized her fears were not about me. They were about her own journey and the changes that come with aging. "I should have told you," she said. "I know," I replied. "But I also should have made it easier for you to tell me." That was a difficult thing to admit, but it was honest. Relationships are rarely damaged by one single moment. More often, small misunderstandings build over time until people finally realize they have been standing on opposite sides of the same problem. The following weekend, Patricia asked me if I wanted to help her organize the documents she had been keeping. Years earlier, that request would have seemed ordinary. But after everything that happened, it felt meaningful. It was her way of saying that she was no longer handling everything alone. We sat together at the kitchen table and went through each paper carefully. There were no secrets, no closed doors, no conversations I was excluded from. Just two people trying to rebuild the trust they had once taken for granted. As we finished, Patricia looked at me and said, "I thought keeping things to myself would make life easier. I did not realize it was making us further apart." I nodded. The hardest part was not the secret. The hardest part was feeling like I was no longer your partner. She reached for my hand. "I do not want us to become that again." In that moment, I understood something important. The greatest test of a relationship is not whether problems appear. Problems will always appear. The real test is whether two people are willing to sit down, listen, and choose each other again. We still had questions to answer. We still had changes to make. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like Patricia and I were moving in the same direction. And then, a few days later, I received a phone call that would reveal another part of the story I never expected to hear. I answered the phone that afternoon without knowing that the conversation would reveal another piece of the story Patricia had been carrying for years. The voice on the other end belonged to someone from her past, someone connected to the property and family records she had been reviewing. I listened carefully as the person explained that Patricia had been trying to resolve a matter that had been left unfinished for a long time. It was not a secret plan to separate herself from me. It was something she believed she needed to complete before it was too late. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a few minutes and thought about how different reality had been from what I first imagined. When I heard Patricia's whisper that night, my mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. I thought about betrayal. I thought about losing everything we built. I thought about discovering that my wife had a completely different life hidden from me. But the truth was not a simple story of someone doing wrong. The truth was about two people who had both allowed fear and assumptions to create distance between them. That evening, I told Patricia about the phone call. She looked surprised but relieved. "I was afraid you would never understand why this mattered to me," she said. I looked at her and realized that for months she had been carrying a burden she never shared. "Patricia, I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me," I said. She nodded. "I know. I keep thinking about that." We sat together in silence for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence like before. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people are finally accepting the truth. Over the next several weeks, we started rebuilding the habits we had lost. We began having morning coffee together without distractions. We took walks around the neighborhood and talked about things beyond daily routines. We started discussing our plans for the future instead of assuming we already knew what the other person wanted. One evening, Patricia brought out an old box filled with letters and photographs from our early years. She placed it on the table and smiled. "I found this while organizing things." Inside were memories from the beginning of our marriage. There were notes we had written to each other, pictures from trips we had taken, and reminders of the people we used to be. We spent hours looking through everything. We laughed at old hairstyles and remembered places we had forgotten. But we also noticed something else. Every important moment in our lives had happened because we faced it together. Buying our first house, supporting each other through difficult years, adjusting when life did not go according to plan. We had always been stronger when we communicated. That was the lesson we had somehow forgotten. A few days later, Patricia asked me a question that I did not expect. Richard, do you think we can really move past this? I looked at her and thought about everything we had been through. I think we can, I answered. But moving past something does not mean pretending it never happened. It means learning from it. She nodded. That was the first time I felt like we were not simply repairing a problem. We were growing from it. I also realized something about myself. When I first heard those words, I felt like my entire marriage was being taken away from me. But now I understood that one painful moment did not erase 42 years of memories. A relationship is not defined by one mistake. It is defined by what people choose to do after that mistake is discovered. Patricia and I still had work to do. Trust had to be rebuilt through actions, not just promises. But there was a difference now. Before, I felt like I was standing outside a door that Patricia had closed. Now, that door was open again. As we sat together on the porch one evening, Patricia held my hand and looked at the sunset. I do not want to spend the rest of our years keeping things from you, she said. I smiled gently. And I do not want us to stop asking each other what we need. That conversation marked the beginning of something new. Not a return to the past, because we could never go back. Instead, it was the beginning of a more honest future. But there was still one final thing I needed to understand. I needed to know why Patricia had been so afraid of losing control in the first place. The answer would change the way I looked at her journey and the years we had shared together. Looking back now, I realized the biggest lesson from those 3 days was not about money, property, or secrets. It was about how easily two people who love each other can slowly stop sharing their fears. Patricia and I spent 42 years building a life together, but somewhere along the way, we both became too comfortable believing we already understood each other. We thought silence meant peace. We thought avoiding difficult conversations meant protecting our relationship. But we learned that real trust is not created by avoiding problems. It is created by facing them together. After everything happened, Patricia and I made a promise to each other. We promised that we would stop assuming and start asking. We would stop carrying worries alone and start sharing them. It sounds simple, but after decades of marriage, simple things can sometimes become the most important. A few months later, we returned to the small piece of property that had caused so much confusion. It was a quiet place surrounded by trees and open fields. Standing there, I finally understood why it mattered so much to Patricia. It was not about ownership. It was about connection. It represented a part of her family history and a piece of her past that she wanted to understand before moving into the next chapter of her life. She looked around and smiled. I spent so much time trying to control the future that I forgot to appreciate the present, she said. I knew exactly what she meant. We both had moments when we focused so much on what might happen that we forgot to value what we already had. Our marriage had never been perfect. No marriages. But perfection was never what made our relationship special. It was the fact that we continued choosing each other through every season of life. That evening, we sat together at home looking through old photographs again. This time, the pictures felt different. They were not reminders of what we almost lost. They were reminders of what we had built. There was the picture from our first house. The picture from our anniversary trip. The picture of us sitting on the porch years earlier, still young enough to believe we had all the answers. We laughed about the things we once worried about and realized how many challenges we had overcome. Patricia reached for my hand and said, I wish I could go back and tell my younger self not to be so afraid. I smiled. I think we all wish we could tell our younger selves something. She looked at me. What would you tell yours? I thought about it carefully. I would tell him that love is not about having a perfect life. It is about having someone who is willing to keep growing with you. Patricia smiled. That was the truth I had learned. A person can make mistakes. A person can become afraid. A person can make choices that hurt someone they love without intending to. What matters is whether they are willing to recognize it and change. Patricia never lost the years we spent together. I never lost the memories we created. The secret I overheard did not destroy our marriage. Instead, it forced us to look honestly at something we had ignored for too long. We had spent years building a home, but we needed to remember that a home is not only made of walls and belongings. It is made of conversations, trust, and the decision to stand beside each other even when things become difficult. Today, when I think about that night in the hallway, I no longer see it as the moment my life changed because of a betrayal. I see it as the moment I was reminded that even the strongest relationships need attention. Even the closest people can become distant if they stop communicating. And even after 42 years, two people can still learn how to understand each other better. Patricia and I did not get a perfect ending. We got something more valuable. We got a second chance to be honest. We got the opportunity to choose each other again, not because we had forgotten what happened, but because we finally understood what our life together was truly worth.